Hi there. In this lecture we see Victor Ciocaltea against Nezhmetdinov in 1954 Bucharest tournament round 11. So e4 from Ciocaltea, e5 from Nezhmetdinov, knight f3, knight c6. We have bishop c4, the Italian game, the two knights defense, and now this sharp knight g5. We have d5, which is one of the best moves, and now this is basically forced knight a5. Polerio defense. It's essentially a gambit. If knight takes d5, white has the very powerful knight takes f7, which is well proven to be an advantage for white. This situation, white's getting a fantastic game overall for the piece sacrifice. So this is, essential territory basically to play knight a5. We have bishop b5 check c6, d takes b takes c6, and now bishop e2. If queen f3, this has been popularized recently by Nakamura, for example. There is an easy way to play this as black, which is to go 2 pawns down. You have to not mind technically being 2 pawns down with bishop e7. So if bishop takes c6 check, here as an example, bishop d7, we're 2 pawns down, but we're so much ahead in development. There's great compensation here. If white castles, knight g4, and then we're hitting that knight, we're looking h2 as well. If h3 in response, knight h6, let's just have a look at this position. So we're 2 pawns down, but we've set the stage for great tactical operations, including this use of the third rank. So rook c6 to g6 is going to be dangerous. So here, for example, we can start to prepare operations, or we can crash down the c file. So depending on what white does, if knight e4, knight takes, queen takes, this position, we can even offer a third pawn. It's this attack on g2 with the bishop without a counterpart, which is going to be so strong. Let's say knight c3, rook g6, you can see that we've got dangerous ideas. And even if that pawn gets lost, so we're kind of 3 pawns down, the attack is super strong here. So we're making a really great attacking position, and it can carry on from there. So yes, it's scary stuff for white. Basically, on queen f3, you can just remember bishop e7. But bishop e2 was played. We have h6, knight f3, e4, knight e5, queen c7, knight g4. Nezhmetdinov takes on g4, bishop takes g4, bishop c5, bishop e2, rook d8, c3. We have now knight b7, which keeps the bishop protected, which can be useful sometimes. White castle. So what would you play here for 10 points? Okay. h5, it does support knight g4 while our rook is on h8. Why not get it involved on the h file? Because on the center file, if we castled and the rook went to e8 later, we're just behind the pawn. So d4 is played. E takes, bishop takes d3, which is actually a big mistake technically. It gives a target on the d file. If instead here, bishop f3, okay, let that pawn be on d3, but at least there isn't a piece having to be protected, which is like an issue here, potentially. And on knight g4, white could play g3 to stop being mated on h2, and that's going to be equal technically. So in the game, there's a target offered, so potentially an undefended piece or underdefended piece, just offering the target fundamentally instead of just sacrificing a pawn. It does seem to be the key mistake. So why? Knight g4 threatens queen takes h2, checkmate. We have queen e2 checking f8, g3. And now queen d7, you can see with tempo now hitting the bishop, and the bishop has to do something. The rook can't really easily move without dropping f2, so the bishop moves, and now h4 protected by the queen and the knight. So this is very dangerous for white. Bishop f4, and now guess what Nezhmetdinov plays for 10 points? Yeah, knight takes h2. Very dangerous position for white. We have rook e1. If king takes h2, h takes g3 check. And here, if king g1, queen h3, rook e1, g takes f2 check, we're crashing through basically with advantage. If king g2 there, rook h2 check is strong, queen h3, this is just a very strong attack. Queen g2 check, g takes f2 check. We can see we're getting a very strong attack, g5 check, queen takes g3, we're going to get a very winning attack here. Okay, so rook e1 is tried, knight g4 back on f2. We have bishop f3, knight takes f2, bishop e3, white's crumbling basically, h takes g3. Note how the knight is protecting the bishop on c5. Bishop takes c5 check, knight takes c5. White tries bishop takes c6 to try and lure the queen away from protecting e7. So what would you play here for 10 points? Yeah? Knight h3 check, not queen takes c6, because then queen e7 check, queen takes d8 check. We've kind of messed things up here. And if the queens come off, if we have an advantage here, it's only small compared to what we could have had. So knight h3 check, the attack is on, king f1. If king g2, we're going to take on c6 with check, very important. And here, for example, queen g6 check, knight e4 is strong in this position. So let's say queen takes e4, queen f6 check. We get coordination on key common squares, killer common squares, knight f4 check, and mating. So king f1 is tried, but now queen f5 check, and the game ends here, white resigned. If bishop f3, g2 check is very strong. So let's take the example of here, if king takes g2, we have knight f4 check, forking king and queen. Let's go with queen takes g2, knight f4. This is very strong here because the other knight can jump in, moving the queen away from the fence. And now queen h3 check and queen g3 check. Knight takes e1 as example. Queen takes e1. We're going to be checkmating very shortly. Checkmate. So yes, a very nice game showing the power of this Polerio defense. It's not technically known as a gambit. It's basically a forced move here because knight takes d5 is unplayable. But it's good to know some variations around here, including modern queen f3 trend. That's why I mentioned that. Is good to know about. So my recommendation here, without too much analysis of variations, bishop e7. You just have to be prepared to be 2 pawns down, compensating factors, extra development, knight square bishop without counterpart, third rank to kind of use as a pivot to get to g2 later. So bear these conceptual ideas in mind. And there's also ideas on the c file as well to bear in mind that the c file can be very dangerous for white too. So yeah, there's enough there on queen f3, but bishop e2, this is actually overall like this, the more standard line, I would say. And Nezhmetdinov gets very good compensation to start off with. It's essentially a gambit, technically a gambit variation. h5, very good, making use of the rook on h8. So yes, some stuff to note here if we want to emulate this kind of game in the two knights defense, the Polerio defense in particular, with knight a5. Very nice. White's mistake, fundamentally, I would say, was underestimating this whole gambit. But technically, later, offering a target on the d file, that bishop on the d file later was the major mistake technically, if we're being very, very high resolution about, fairly high resolution about what mistakes really from an engine perspective here. Bishop f3 would have held the balance, basically. So it's about not even having an underprotected piece, a piece which is having to be protected. So it's like taking a step further. If we think about unprotected pieces, or then we can go a step further, underprotected pieces. So not just unprotected, but actually underprotected. They are protected, but it's underprotected. And then you can say, well, needing protection in any case. If the bishop's on f3, it's not needing protection. So yeah, the bishop on d3, providing that major tempo gainer, just accelerated black's attack. Okay, Thanks very much. All comments, questions, likes and subscribes, really appreciated. Thanks so much.